Funafuti Atoll, the capital and one of 9 islands comprising the remote nation of Tuvalu. This is one of the smallest countries in the world. Its average elevation of 2 meters makes Tuvalu extremely vulnerable to storms and sea level rise. People the world over migrate in search of a better life. But this is a story about people on 2 small Pacific Island nations being forced to move by the potential disappearance of their homeland underwater. People have started to leave the islands, abandoning their homes. It's a concern shared by the nearby island nation of Kiribati.
It'd be a very sad day when there will no longer be a country, a nation, a people called Kiribati.
The president says his people have the next few decades to prepare for relocation.
We are preparing our people, equipping them to be able to relocate if and when necessary with dignity. We would not wish to see our people as climate change refugees.
Sea level rise and unusually big waves are threatening the Kiribati population of about 100,000 people. But the older generation in Kiribati is not willing to leave.
Because if you were to ask me, and if you were to ask the elderly in Kiribati, the answer is no. They would wish to stay on, even die here. The best we can hope to have is to maintain the integrity of our culture. Whether we will be able to have our people settle all in one place, I doubt it. What personally I would like to see happen is for us to maintain a nation of Kiribati somehow. We have to do that so that the new generation or generations of Kiribati people in different parts of the world will have somewhere to go to say that this is what once was our nation.
Good evening, Rowan. It's the 12th of February 2016 and it's about 11:30 in the evening. I hope you've enjoyed that little propaganda video from the United Nations intended to convince everybody that the globe's warming and the sea levels are catastrophically rising due to melting ice caps. And we all have to abandon our lifestyles in the West, otherwise it will be a cataclysm for people in other parts of the world. Anyway, I know you wholeheartedly endorse this view, and I'm going to say some more about that later on because I'm still commenting on your little talk at the launch of Eco Church on the 26th of January 2016. Now, before I go on to do that, I'm going to read an extract from a book by James Perloff called Truth is a Lonely Warrior. I've actually got this information off his website. Some of the book is published on his website. So it's talking about the ecumenical movement in the US mainly, and the founding of the World Council of Churches. So there's quite a bit I want to read before I come on to the next point that I'm making. So I'll just get on with that now. So here's what it says, and I've abbreviated it slightly so that I can get in the points that I want to get across before I move on to the next part of this video. So here's what it says. The Federal Council of Churches, later called the National Council of Churches, was founded in 1908, heavily funded by the Rockefellers. It was to become the structural core of the drive to consolidate American Christianity. The man chosen to spearhead ecumenism was John Foster Dulles, an in-law of the Rockefellers. At the 1919 Peace Conference, which formed the League of Nations, the first step towards a world government, John Foster Dulles was legal counsel to the United States delegation. So that's the end of my first quotation. I'm just going to make the comment that the League of Nations is the predecessor of the United Nations. So it goes on to say about John Foster Dulles that he was a founder member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he also chaired the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where his choice for president of that institution was Alger Hiss, the notorious communist spy who was Secretary General of the UN's founding conference in 1945. So that's the end of that little quotation. I just want to mention that the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a body in the United States that many people think is part of the US government, but in fact it isn't. It's a separate organisation that was founded with the stated intention of world domination. And if you look on their website, you'll see that they've got their tentacles absolutely everywhere. So moving on now to quote some more from James Perloff. In 1948, the World Council of Churches was formed. John Foster Dulles attended the founding conference in Amsterdam. Funding for the World Council of Churches came from the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations. Although the National and World Council of Churches provided structures for consolidation, the question remained of how to motivate churches to unite. Christian denominations often vary on various theological issues, but they generally agree on values, helping the poor and sick, for example. The strategy for unification, therefore, was to encourage them to collaborate where they did agree. This took the form of an action-oriented programme known as the social gospel, and this is one of the things that the emergent church promotes as well, and you do tend to promote a lot of emergent church doctrine, if you can call it doctrine, in the things that you say. And many people who are not familiar with the emergent church are under the impression that you're saying things that are very original, but in fact you're just parroting from the globalist script that you've been given, of which the emergent church is actually a huge part of the drive towards one world religion, to erode the distinctiveness of Christianity and of other religions as well, particularly when they would take an independent stance against the values that the globalists are promoting, such as depopulation, for example. So I'm going to now play a clip from a propaganda video from the World Council of Churches. And after I've done that, I'm going to comment on what you've said in your little talk at the launch of Eco Church on the 26th of January 2016.
We're on our way to Tuvalu, a small group of atolls in the South Pacific, a 2-hour flight north of Fiji, midway between Australia and Hawaii. The territory of Tuvalu covers an area almost the size of France and the United Kingdom combined, but only 26 square kilometers are above sea level. Due to environmental factors such as global warming, rising ocean levels, and soil erosion, Tuvalu is at the moment slowly shrinking in landmass at a rate of about 2 millimeters per year. It's expected that sometime in the future, Tuvalu will be entirely underwater. We've come to learn how the Tuvaluans see the future. Our first stop is Nauti Primary School. We're especially keen to hear how the children see it.
I'm sad because Tuvalu will be under the sea.
I learned about ice caps and glaciers in outer islands in the Arctic. They are melting 40% or something more than. So it's now getting more smaller, and the ice, well, they are floating in the sea.
I actually noticed the changes when I was a bit younger, but during that time I didn't have the knowledge and the ability to link the changes with what is happening. But now, looking back at what I have observed, I realize that, you know, the impacts of climate change has been here.
With global warming, with the evidence, it's true and it's scary. But I wish to die here.
There is no justice, you know. When we talk about climate change is a justice issue. It's a moral issue. And it is the moral obligation of the international community to respond in a way that can ensure life continuity and our survival on our small societies and our small island countries.
We want to be Tuvaluans.
So I'm now going on to comment a bit further on the talk that you gave at St Paul's Cathedral at the launch of Eco Church on the 26th of January 2016. So here's something that you said. When I think of issues around ecology and the environment, it's particular people and places that come to mind. So you're trying to direct people away from questioning the science of the matter, discussing whether it's happening or not and to what extent if it is. You're trying to steer people away from the facts and to tie them in emotionally with the people that you're going to describe in the little anecdotes that you give. And this is very similar to what you did on 9/11 by pretending to be in Manhattan and telling us this emotionally dramatic story about how you thought you were going to die several times and the Twin Towers were going to fall down on you and you had to rescue some tiny children and a workman in a porter cabin was saying a prayer and all this kind of thing. And so we're so tied in emotionally to this story and having all these emotions in relation to it that we're paralysed really from thinking about whether the whole scenario that your little anecdotes relate to is even true at all. So this is more perception management on your part. And as I've said before, you're a perception manager for the New World Order, and you did it in relation to 9/11, you've done it in relation to many things, and here you're doing it in relation to the global warming hoax. So you go on to say, I think of sitting down with a bishop from the Pacific, showing me photographs of rising sea levels in Pacific Islands and of a very dramatic photograph which showed a distant view of an island with a settlement abandoned at shore level and rebuilt halfway up a mountain because of rising sea levels. Well, I don't know what island you could be talking about, but actually having to move your settlement up a mountain isn't really a big deal, to be honest, because you're just moving a bit, you're still on your own land, you're still living with your own people, and you're still in the environment that you're used to in order to support yourself and your family and your community. So I don't know whether this story's true or not about it being halfway up a mountain, and I do think that you're probably talking about Tuvalu, which doesn't have any mountains in. I think the highest point is 4.5 metres above sea level, so there aren't any mountains, so that's an exaggeration if indeed you are talking about Tuvalu. And I do have a reason to think that you're talking about Tuvalu because you've referred to it before in a lecture that you gave, the Ebor lecture, which I believe was in 2009, and I'm going to link to it in the show notes anyway. There's a transcript on the Archbishop of Canterbury website, and in part 3 of that lecture you say, the ecological crisis challenges us to be reasonable. Put like that it sounds banal, but given the level of irrationality around the question, it is well worth saying, especially if we are clear about the roots of reasoning in these skills of negotiating the world of material objects. I don't intend to discuss in detail the rhetoric of those who deny the reality of climate change, except to say that rhetoric, as King Canute demonstrated, does not turn back rising waters. So you don't want to talk about the facts, that's what you're saying. It's all rhetoric, there are no facts. In fact, everything that you say is rhetoric, there are no facts. So this is what you're saying. Anyone who doesn't agree that human beings are causing the globe to warm up is in denial, basically, and is denying it, and all the truth and the facts are on your side, so you claim, and there's certainly no political agenda behind it. Anyway, you go on to say, so you're talking about the rhetoric of climate change deniers not turning back rising waters. So no melodrama there then. And you go on to say, if you live in Bangladesh or Tuvalu, scepticism about global warming is precisely the opposite of reasonable. Negotiating this environment means recognising the fact of rising sea levels, and understanding what is happening necessarily involves recognising how rising temperatures affect sea levels. And then you go on to talk about how it's possible to argue about the exact degree to which human intervention is responsible, which it isn't really responsible at all. It's absolutely minuscule. If carbon dioxide emitted as the result of activity of human beings is causing the globe to warm, the extent of it is absolutely minuscule, and there is in fact only 0.4% carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and it isn't a toxic gas. Many people refer to the fact that plants breathe carbon dioxide, and actually it would be beneficial to plants and therefore to human beings to actually have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But another thing is as well that carbon dioxide saturation in the blood actually controls breathing. So it's the level of carbon dioxide in the blood, when that increases, that's what causes a person to breathe in. So if we didn't have any carbon dioxide, we'd all stop breathing. So that's just another factor I thought I'd mention from my science A levels, which you obviously haven't got. You don't need to be a genius astrophysicist to understand these things. The science is actually very basic in a lot of areas pertaining to this subject. So you go on to talk about how it's a complete coincidence according to global warming deniers. That's me. I'm a global warming denier. I'm absolutely freezing, in fact. But you go on to say that it's global warming deniers, as you put it, really. I think it's just a complete coincidence that we've got escalating temperatures, and at the same time we've got escalating carbon dioxide. But the simple fact is we haven't really got escalating temperatures. And in any case, you emit an awful lot of carbon dioxide, don't you, as I've said before. You mentioned Tuvalu here, so I've gone on a bit about that, but this is what made me think you were talking about Tuvalu, because I know you've mentioned it before. And you also do mention Bangladesh, rising sea levels in relation to Bangladesh. But in fact the sea levels are falling around Bangladesh, and there's been some coastal erosion, which is the result of Bangladeshis who are in the coastal region digging up mangroves so they can farm shrimps. And it has absolutely nothing to do with global warming or melting ice caps or rising sea levels. So there's been coastal erosion, not rising sea levels in Bangladesh. In fact, the sea levels have fallen around Bangladesh, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. I want to talk about rising sea levels in the Pacific now. I know you don't like facts, you like to be emotionally blackmailing us, but this is an article from Science Direct, and it's called "The Dynamic Response of Reef Islands to Sea Level Rise, Evidence from Multi-Decadal Analysis of Island Change in the Central Pacific." And I'm just going to read a bit from the abstract now. Low-lying atoll islands are widely perceived to erode in response to measured and future sea level rise. Using historical aerial photography and satellite images, this study presents the first quantitative analysis of physical changes in 27 atoll islands in the Central Pacific over a 19 to 61 year period. This period of analysis corresponds with instrumental records that show a rate of sea level rise of 2 millimeters per year in the Pacific. Results show that 86% of islands remained stable, 43% had increased area, and 43% had a stable area. 43% had an increased area. It's not written very well, this part of the abstract. Largest decadal rates of increase in island areas range between 0.1 to 5.6 hectares. Only 14% of study islands exhibited a net reduction in island area. Despite small net changes in area, islands exhibited larger gross changes. This was expressed as changes in the planform configuration and positions of islands on reef platforms. Modes of island change included ocean shoreline displacement towards the lagoon, lagoon shoreline progradation, and extension of the ends of elongate islands. Collectively, these adjustments represent net lagoonward migration of islands in 65% of cases. Results contradict existing paradigms of island response and have significant implications for the consideration of island stability under ongoing sea level rise in the Central Pacific. First, islands are geomorphologically persistent features on atoll reef platforms and can increase in island area despite sea level change. Second, islands are dynamic landforms that undergo a range of physical adjustments in responses to changing boundary conditions, of which sea level is just one factor. Third, erosion of island shorelines must be reconsidered in the context of physical adjustments of the entire island shoreline, as erosion may be balanced by progradation on other sectors of shorelines. Results indicate that the style and magnitude of geomorphic change will vary between islands. Therefore, island nations must place a high priority on resolving the precise styles and rates of change that will occur over the next century and reconsider the implications for adaptation. So basically, there's many factors that affect the size of islands that are on reefs, and rising sea levels is only one of them. And despite the fact that the Pacific sea level is rising by 2 millimetres a year, this hasn't negatively affected 86% of the islands in this study. 43% of them remained stable, and 43% of them had an increased area. So that means only 14% had a reduced area, and this is all added to the fact that anthropogenic global warming is a hoax. And so just to finish off this area of commentary, I thought I'd show you an article from your favourite publication, the Daily Mail, which actually says that the Arctic sea ice cap has increased by 43%. Despite the fact that Al Gore said it was going to have disappeared by 2013. I think that was the year he said it was going to disappear by. So, oh yes, he made those comments in 2007. This is from the Mail on Sunday, sorry, not the Daily Mail, but it's a very similar publication. Anyway, so this is what the article says. But 7 years after his warning, the Mail on Sunday can reveal that, far from vanishing, the Arctic ice cap has expanded for the second year in succession, with a surge, depending on how you measure it, of between 43 and 63% since 2012. And I'm going to show you a nice picture now. So there you are, look. There's some pictures of the Arctic ice cap. So there you are. So it looks like it's not really melting after all. You know, there's lots of factors that affect sea level. You talked about tectonic shifts in your talk, didn't you? I mentioned that before, your tectonic shifts. But the tectonic shifts, you know, more than likely affect sea level. With the continents moving around, it's going to affect the amount of space that's available for the sea to be contained in, which is clearly going to affect sea level. So the sea level isn't necessarily related to the extent of ice in the ice caps anyway. I don't know a great deal about this subject, but things are more complicated than, oops, a bit of ice has melted, we're all going to drown. Oh. So the Arctic ice cap, at the time of this article was written, the 30th of August 2014, covered 1.7 million square kilometres more than 2 years ago. So between 2012 and 2014, the Arctic meltdown involved the ice cap expanding by 1.7 million square kilometres. And that area is twice the size of Alaska, according to this article. So I've ranted on for quite some time now, so I'll leave it there for now, but do remember that I won't be seducing any priests over the weekend, despite the fact it's Valentine's Day. I'm kicking myself that I didn't send you a Valentine's card, as you can imagine. But never mind, I'll send you one next year when you're in jail. You'll be glad of getting some post then, won't you? So I'll leave it there then. Have a nice weekend, and don't forget, there's still time for me to come and arrest you, so be alert. Hasta la próxima.
And part of the importance of that story is, of course, quite simply, that it's one of those things that challenges our frustration and our despair. Something I found myself saying repeatedly when talking about this subject is that the great danger is to start by assuming it's all too big for us. A problem is as big as the number of people who take it seriously. We start taking it seriously, and it starts resolving. It's as simple as that, I think. In my 10 somewhat eventful years as doing some sort of job in the church, which I remember vaguely, I had the privilege and the challenge of travelling a great deal and seeing something of what these issues meant in different parts of the world. And so when I think of issues around ecology and the environment, it's particular people and places that come to mind. I think of sitting down with a bishop from the Pacific, showing me photographs of rising sea levels in the Pacific Islands, and a very dramatic photograph which showed a distant view of an island with a settlement abandoned at shore level and rebuilt halfway up a mountain because of rising sea levels. I think of visits to Western Kenya and the desolate, deforested landscape that was around in some areas, the desertification of land. And I think of dogged little groups there working away at reforestation and at various ecologically friendly and sustainable means of surviving, finding fuel and so forth. It is, of course, connected with the fact that it's not much use, as we've been reminded already this evening, talking eloquently and inventively about this subject without putting our own house in order, without showing what can be done, without attacking that despair and frustration that so often paralyzes people. If we are going to talk about it, we need to do something about it. By doing something about it, we show that something can be done. By showing that something can be done, we begin to shift the moral consensus that little bit further towards a viable, a just, and a sustainable future. But that leads me to a second point: viable, just, and sustainable futures. And the word I want to focus on there is, of course, just. In the last few years, Christian Aid, which I have the privilege of chairing, has increasingly made climate change one of its major strategic themes. And some people have said, but Christian Aid is about alleviating poverty, isn't it? And we say, yes, exactly. Climate change, ecological issues, all the related bundle of things that eco-church is about. This is not something that stands simply alongside other, inverted commas, good causes. It's something intrinsically bound up with our work for the justice of the world and the well-being of its peoples. And that can't be said too often and too loudly. This is not an optional extra for tree-hugging eccentrics. This is something which is bound up with our sense of responsibility for our brothers and sisters worldwide, for the most vulnerable communities in the world, and of course not least for our own descendants. We're gradually beginning to get the idea that there's a justice issue about the kind of world we leave to the generations to come. Do we want to pass on to our children and grandchildren a livable world or not? One aspect of passing on a livable world is ecological. Another is economic, but they're bound up very tightly together. And as I've often said, economy and ecology are both long Greek words for housekeeping. Housekeeping, taking responsibility for where we live, keeping house, making homes. That's what those words are about. They're inseparably connected, and we need to hang on to that connection for all we're worth. Because as soon as people begin to say, well, actually, we can't really afford ecologically friendly measures, you need to be ready to say, that's exactly the kind of thing we have to afford, because it's not an alternative to justice, not an alternative to the care of the poor, and so on.